Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us tonight for Art and Stories. I would like to start with thanking the San Diego Storytellers and Marilyn McPhee for reaching out to us to start this wonderful collaboration and celebration of storytelling, which truly comes in all different shapes. I want to thank our storytellers for tonight as well, Fred Skowski and Linda King-Pruitt, who I'll introduce later. I've said this before, but nothing brings communities together more than storytelling, be it through visual or oral mediums. And I know right now we could all use some connection, and I look forward to joining you this evening to listen and experience the wonderful power of sharing stories. Kahn and Selesnick are amazing storytellers themselves, as you've seen in their work and their book, 100 Views of the Drowning World, which is filled with wonderful stories. Tonight, we will hear some stories that were sparked back into life in the storytellers' minds when they looked at Kahn and Selesnick's work. After the storytellers, we will open up the conversation to your questions, so please leave them in the Q&A. But first, I would like to welcome Fred Liskowski. Fred was raised in Wilmington, Delaware, in a family that sat around the dinner table sharing stories. He began performing stories in 1995 when he found his way to the Storytellers of San Diego. He loves to tell stories from around the world, from folk tales to true tales. He especially likes to tell stories of magic, mystery, and transforming power. His program of stories and peace and nonviolence in a tumultuous world is particularly relevant today. Thank you so much for joining us, Fred.
Greetings. Can you hear me? Okay,
yes.
Thank you. Greetings to everyone out there in the land of Zoom. It's a very rare occasion to tell stories in this way, but the arts will go on, virus or no virus. So, and thank you all for being here with us tonight from wherever you happen to be. I would like to also thank Husha and the Lux Art Institute for hosting this event, and Marilyn McPhee, who was mentioned, the president of our Storytellers of San Diego, for having invited me tonight. So I thought about what kind of art I like, and obviously you probably would guess that my favorite art is the art of storytelling. And I also love one of my favorite types of art is photography. And so I thought when they invited me to this particular evening, it was a perfect match. And so in perusing some of the art pieces as I prepared and thought about a story for this evening to share with you, I noticed a picture that was called Birdcage. And I was particularly drawn to this picture because I love nature and I love walking through nature. And I love doing that in a solitary way, just like the man is in this picture. And it just reminded me of many, many areas that I've hiked through and areas from my hometown, my home area where I grew up. And in further looking, I saw all the birds up there in the sky. And though the man is solitary, I feel like I feel when I'm out in nature that I'm not really alone out there. There's the beautiful grasses and there's the sun and the blue sky and the birds up ahead and the songs of the birds. And so I chose this picture as sort of the theme from which I would pick a story to share with you. And it's about two birds, sort of. And I see in the picture that the birds up there, I think, are blue herons. The birds in the story I'll be sharing with you are not herons, but they're two birds. And I thought there was a nice connection there. And so I'm about to share with you a story called The Enchanted Storks. It's an old folktale from Baghdad in the Middle East. And it's retold by a modern day storyteller named Aaron Shepard. And I also would like to thank him tonight for giving me permission to tell this story. You can find hundreds of his stories on his website, aaronshepard.com. And before I embark into the story, I'd like to also mention Mr. Kahn and Mr. Selesnick and thank them for joining us in this art and stories endeavor. And so without further ado, here is the story of his called The Enchanted Storks. Long ago, in the great and glorious city of Baghdad, there was a caliph, the ruler of all Islam, commander of the faithful. The people of Baghdad loved their ruler. Yet one thing mystified them. All who went before him were amazed by his intimate knowledge of their daily lives. The caliph has 1,000 eyes, people would say, looking behind them for spies. But the caliph's true secret was this. Each afternoon, he and his trusted vizier would disguise themselves as merchants and slip through a hidden door in the palace wall. Then they would roam the bazaars of the city and listen to the talk and gossip of the day. On one such afternoon, as the caliph and his vizier were wandering through a marketplace, an old and wizened man thrust one of his wares beneath the caliph's nose. "What a lovely snuff box," said the caliph, admiring the carvings and the jeweled inlay. "What will you ask for it?" "Only 1 gold coin," wheezed the peddler. Well, the caliph gave him 2, took the box, and walked on. Reaching the edge of the city, the caliph and the vizier strolled through the parks and the orchards beyond. Finally, deciding to take a rest, they stopped by a quiet lake. "I wonder if my new box holds any snuff." And he opened it to find that it was indeed filled with the pungent powder. But what is this?" And he was pulling a piece of parchment from the underside of the lid. His vizier said, "Glorious Lord, what does it say? What is it?" And so the caliph read the parchment. Let's see, it appears that my snuff might be magic. It says, a sniff of snuff for wings to soar, cassal of air for hands once more. Maybe it is magic. You know, I have always wanted to see my city from the air. Yes, but perhaps, Lord, we should be cautious. What if the charm doesn't change us back? Well, if the snuff works, I'm sure the magic word will too. What have we to lose? Come, let us try our luck. And so he held out the box and each man took a pinch of the snuff. And then together they inhaled the powder. In an instant, and a flurry of wings and beaks and feathers, where there had been a caliph and his vizier, stood 2 storks. "Wonderful," said the caliph, snapping and clattering his beak, for that is how storks talk. A human would have only heard clap, clap, but because both men were now birds, Ali ben Manzar, the vizier, he understood perfectly. In fact, replied clap, clap of his own, saying, "Quite amazing." "Clap, clap," said the caliph. "Yes, and let us try out our wings." And so the 2 storks took to the air. They lifted, and then they circled higher and higher. Spread below them were meadows and ornamental gardens and orchards and fields of crops. The great river, the Tigris, flowed slowly across the plain, sprouting canals along its length, and basking along the banks of the river was Baghdad, capital of all Islam, city of peace. Breathtaking, is it not? Cried the Caliph. Come, let us fly over the city. And soon the two soared over the streets and the bridges and the canals and the clay brick buildings of Baghdad. In courtyard and bazaar, people bought and sold, worked and rested, fought and prayed, stole and chased, kissed and parted, laughed and wept. Truly, a stork knows this city better than the Caliph himself. As evening drew near, the vizier called out, Glorious Lord, we had best get back to the palace. And so, flying back to the lake, and they landed by the snuff box. The Caliph read the parchment again and then cried, Kasalaver! And there stood two storks. Kasalaver! He called again, Kasalaver! Kasalaver! But storks they remained. Terrified, he said, Ali ben Manzar, you try it. An equally terrified vizier then cried, Kasalaver, Kasalaver. But no matter how they called and hopped, flapped their wings, nothing changed. At last, the two storks stood exhausted. It seems that some enemy has lured us into this enchantment. Yes, but what do we do? I know of nothing. Without the magic word to break the spell, we may never regain our true forms. The sun was dipping into the lake as the two storks stood lost in thought. Finally, the Caliph spoke. Well, storks or not, my stomach is aching for something to eat. But what is our food? Well, glorious Lord, we must eat what all storks eat. Fish and mice, toads and frogs and snakes and eels and snails and grubs and worms and slugs. And so the two poked their beaks in rushes at the water's edge and in holes along its banks. And when they had eaten all that they could bear, each stood on one leg, crossed the other against it, buried his beak in his breast feathers, and slept. The next morning, they hid the snuff box and flew off to the palace. From high on a turret, they watched the pandemonium within the palace walls as soldiers and courtiers and servants rushed about in search of the Caliph and the vizier, a search that the storks knew all too well was in vain. Then, glancing behind him, the vizier called out, Glorious Lord, look, a caravan approaches. And there, through the streets of Baghdad, came a magnificent procession of horsemen, camel riders, and servants on foot. And at its head rode a horseman in regal dress. By the beard of the prophet, that is my brother Omar. He has long coveted my throne. The caravan reached the gate. The lead horseman looked up and called to the guards, I am Omar, and I am the brother of the Caliph, and I have heard that through secret means now, that the Caliph is missing and will not return. I, as the true successor to the Prophet Muhammad, have come to take my brother's place as commander of the faithful and ruler of all Islam. Do not open that gate, cried the Caliph. But of course, all that the startled people below heard was clap, clap. And when they looked up, they saw two storks, one of them hopping about madly, flapping its wings and clattering its beak. You see, even the storks welcome me. Now open the gate. The gate was opened, and Omar rode in triumphantly. High on the turret, the Caliph stood silent and still. Come, glorious Lord. There is nothing more that we can do here. Let us fly far from the city. In solitude, maybe we can learn to find the strength to bear our fate. And so the two soared beyond the city and the plains to a lonely forest that sat in the foothills of the great mountains. There, they began their new life, dining on tree toads and fish, and trying never to think of Baghdad or the affairs of a caliph. One afternoon, the two storks had wandered into a different part of the forest. How gloomy and silent it is here, not even a rustle of leaves. And then a quick tap, tap, tap startled them, and they looked and they saw a woodpecker searching for worms in the bark of a tree. And to their amazement, they saw tears flowing from the woodpecker's eyes. Good woodpecker, why do you weep? Why should I not? You were born a bird and have known no other life. But I am a princess. The evil sorcerer Kador cast this spell upon me because I would not marry him. And now a bird I must remain until such time when another man asks me to wed. Now do you see why I weep? What man would ask a bird for marriage? Do you see? I do. But tell me, how do you come to be in this part of the forest? Is the sorcerer himself hereabouts? There is a clearing over there, she's pointing with her beak. Every night he meets there with his magicians. Ali Ben Manzar, come. We may find a way to help our little friend, perhaps ourselves as well. And so making their way through the thick forest, the Caliph and the Vizier reached a wide rocky ground where no plant grew. Hiding in the bushes at its edge, they waited for the gathering dark. As the moon rose and cast its light into the clearing, they saw 3 cloaked figures enter the circle from different paths. Then they went to a tall, flat rock in the very center and built a fire and sat cross-legged around it. Then suddenly the flames leaped up and a 4th cloaked figure appeared standing there. The magicians, "Hail, Kador! Hail, hail, Kador, greatest sorcerer of all," touching their heads to the ground. "By the beard of the prophet," said the Caliph, "that is the very peddler who sold us the box." And before the 2 storks had time to recover from this surprise, there was another. With the clattering of hooves, into the clearing rode the Caliph's brother, Omar. He rode right up to the center before that fire. Hail, sorcerer, hail. Hail, 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 Caliph, glorious Lord. And tell me, how dost thou fare in the city of Baghdad? Quite excellently. The people, they prefer their old ruler, but they learn to fear me and obey. And as for you, sorcerer, you have well earned your reward. And Omar tossed to Kador a bulging pouch. But you never did tell me. How did you get rid of my brother? Oh, glorious Lord, it was nothing easier, nothing easier. You see, I disguised myself as a peddler and sold him a box of magic snuff. That brother of yours and that dolt of a vizier, well, they changed themselves, quite obligingly, I must add, into storks. I even gave them the word of disenchantment, or nearly so. What do you mean, nearly? Well, I might have switched 2 letters. I wrote down the word Cassalaver instead of Colossaver. You are a true master. I think I shall have need of your services again. And Omar spurred his horse and raced from the clearing. And then Kador turned to his magicians. Come now, we have spells to prepare. There will be no spells tonight. Of course, the only sound they heard was clap, clap. But suddenly there were 2 storks upon them, pummeling them with powerful wings and sharp beaks pecking them. Oh, it is the Caliph and his vizier, cried Kador as he ran from the clearing, closely followed at his heels by his magicians. Glorious Lord, shouldn't we be following after them? No, Ali Ben Manzar. We have spells to undo. And even as he spoke these words, the woodpecker alighted beside them. What was all that noise? Dear princess, you will know presently. And the Caliph drew a deep, anxious breath and called out, Colossaver! And immediately, in a flurry of wings and beaks and feathers, where there had been 2 storks, were now the Caliph and his vizier. Turning to a very astonished woodpecker, the Caliph spoke again. Dear princess, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? And in another flurry of feathers, there stood a young woman of slender figure and dancing eyes. The honor will be mine. The next morning, they went to a nearby village and borrowed horses. Then they rode into the city of Baghdad. By the time they reached the palace, there was a joyous crowd that had gathered behind them. Open the gate. And as the gate was flung open, just so happened that Omar had just come to the palace yard. Seeing the Caliph, he turned the color of parchment. Seize him! And the guards dragged Omar before the Caliph, who was begging to his brother, Dear brother, please, please, dear brother, spare me my life. For your treason, I should have you beheaded. But instead, I am banishing you by ship to the farthest end of the earth. And by the beard of the prophet, along the journey, you shall eat nothing but toads and snails. And so the caliph had regained his throne and gained a lovely wife besides. And if he seemed to know more about his people than ever before, no one guessed how. For few ever even noticed the pair of storks that soared on many an afternoon above the streets of Baghdad. And that is the story of the enchanted storks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fred, for that wonderful story. Such an amazing tale. I don't want to detract from it. So if you have questions for Fred, please leave them in the Q&A and he'll get to your questions at the end. But now I would like to introduce Linda King Pruitt. Linda was raised on a tall tales from her dad, folk and fairy tales from her mother, and Native American tales from her Choctaw grandmother. A storyteller and story teacher since 1994, she has performed and taught across the US and has toured Ecuador and the Galapagos Islands with academic arrangements abroad. She was a resident artist with Fullerton's All the Arts and All the Kids Arts Education Program from 1996 to 2015, and was also the storyteller for the Pacific Symphony Class Act Program, and a resident artist with Makathaler Cultural Centers, I'm sorry if I ruin these names, the STEAM outreach programs, as well as for the California Arts Council in the Californian Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. Thank you so much for joining us, Linda.
Thank you. And thank you all for allowing me to come and share a story with you tonight. When Marilyn McPhee, president of the Storytellers of San Diego, contacted me and asked me if I could come share a story, I started looking at this amazing art of Kahn Selesnick. And I found it so curious and creative and a little bit crazy. I was trying to pick out a picture that I could link to a story that would inspire me. And I came across a picture called A Ship of Fools. And instantly I knew that this was a story because it reminded me of a story I love very much. It's a Russian folktale, and it's about another fool and a ship, and it's called The Fool of the World and the Flying Ship. And it begins, once upon a time, there was an old peasant and his wife, and they had 3 sons. Now, 2 of them were clever young men who could borrow money without being cheated. But the third was the fool of the world. He was as simple as a child, simpler than some children, and he never hurt a soul in his life. The mother and father thought quite a lot of the 2 smart young men, but the fool of the world was lucky if he got enough to eat because, well, they forgot him, unless they were looking right at him, and sometimes even then. Now it happened that the Tsar, the king of the country, sent his messengers out to all the high roads and the rivers and even to the huts in the forest to announce that he was going to give his daughter, the princess, in marriage to whoever could bring him a flying ship. A ship with wings that could sail in the blue sky like a ship sailing on the sea. This is a chance for us, said those 2 smart young brothers. And they set off that very same day to see if one of them could build a flying ship and marry the Tsar's daughter and so be a very great man indeed. The father blessed them and gave them fine clothes to wear, and the mother put together vast baskets of food and drink for the road. And so the 2 brothers set off on their adventure to see what could be done with their cleverness. And what happened to them, I cannot tell you because they were never heard of again. The fool of the world saw them off with their fine clothes and their baskets of food, and he said, I should like to go too. I want to wear fine clothes and eat good food and marry the princess. You foolish boy, said his mother. If you were to leave this house, you would walk into the arms of a bear. And if not that, then the wolves would eat you before you'd finish staring at them. But the fool of the world would not be held back by words. He said, I am going. I am going, I am going, I am going, I am going. And he kept saying this over and over and over again until his mother saw there was nothing for it. And she was glad to have him out of the house. Now she put together some food for him. Dry, stale crust of bread and a flask of water in a bag. The fool of the world took that bag and set off for his adventure. He sang on the way. He sang because, well, the trees were green and there was a blue sky overhead. Now, he hadn't gone very far before he came across an old man with a bent back and a long beard. And the old man said, good day to you, young fella. Where are you off to? Oh, haven't you heard? The Tsar is going to give his daughter, the princess, in marriage to whoever can bring him a flying ship. Ah, and you can make this flying ship, can you? No, said the fool, I don't know how. Well, if that's how it is, then come and have a seat here beside me. We'll rest a bit and we'll have something to eat. Now, bring out what you have in your bag. Ah, the fool hung his head. I am ashamed to offer you what I have. Oh, it's good enough for me, but it's not the sort of meal one would share with company. But the old man just smiled and said, oh, out with it. Let us eat what we are given. And so the fool opened his bag and was quite surprised to find it held not dry crust of bread, but fresh white rolls, slices of meat and cheese, and oh, that wasn't water in the flask, it was a good wine. And so the fool and the old man, they sat and they ate and they drank and they laughed and they told stories and they even sang a song or two. And then the old man said, now listen to me carefully. Off with you into the forest. Go up to the first big tree you see and strike it a blow with your axe, and then fall backward on the ground. Close your eyes and go to sleep. And when you wake up, you'll find the ship finished and ready to sail. The fool of the world thanked the old man, said his goodbyes, and set off for the forest. And he walked straight up to the first big tree he saw, swung his axe 3 times around his head and struck a mighty blow on the trunk of that tree. And then he fell backwards on the ground, closed his eyes, and fell asleep. When he woke up, he saw his axe beside him, worn out. The tree was gone, and in its place stood a little ship, finished and ready to fly. The fool of the world lost no time at all. He jumped into that ship, sat down and seized the tiller, and that little ship leaped up in the air and soared over the treetops. The fool steered for the high road, and on he flew. He looked down, and he saw a man lying on the road with his ear against the ground. He called down, good day to you, uncle. What are you listening to down there? Oh, said the man, I am listening to all that is being said and done in the world. Won't you come and take a seat with me in the ship? And the man said, I will. And so he climbed into the ship, sat down, and off they flew. And on they flew, until they came to a man hopping on one leg down the road. And the fool called down, good day to you, uncle. And why are you hopping along on one foot? Oh, well, you see there, if I were to take this other foot that's tied up beside my head here, I'd be across the world in a single stride. Well, won't you come and have a seat with us in my ship, invited the fool. And the man willingly went. He hopped into the ship, sat down, and off they flew. On and on they flew, until they came to a man they saw aiming a gun. And what he was aiming at, they couldn't see. So the fool called down, "Good day to you, uncle. Tell us what you're aiming at. We don't see a bird or a beast within sight." "Oh," said the man, "now if there were a bird or beast within sight, I wouldn't shoot at that. But if it's a bird or beast 1,000 miles away, now that's the mark for me." "Come and have a seat with us," invited the fool. And so the marksman joined the companions, and off they flew. On and on they flew. And by they came to a man who was walking along with a sack full of bread on his back. "Good day to you, uncle," called the fool. "Where are you going?" "Well, I'm going to find some bread for my supper," said the man. "But you have a whole sack full of bread on your back there," said the fool. "What? That little crumb back there? Why, that wouldn't even be a mouthful for me." "Won't you come and join us?" said the fool. And so that hungry man took his seat with the companions, and off they flew. On and on they flew, until they came to a man they saw walking round and round a lake. The fool called down, "Good day to you, uncle. What are you looking for down there?" "Oh, I'm thirsty," said the man, "and I can't find anything to drink." "But there's a whole lake there," said the fool. "Why don't you drink from it?" "What? That little drop there? Why, if I were to drink that all in one gulp, it wouldn't even wet the back of my throat." "Won't you come and join us?" invited the fool. And so that thirsty man climbed into the ship, and off they sailed. On and on they sailed, and by they came to a man who was walking along with a sack of straw. And the fool asked, "Where are you off to, uncle?" And the man said, "Well, I'm taking this straw into the village." "And does the village have need of straw?" asked the fool. "Well, no," said the man, "but you see, this is special straw. Now, even on the hottest day in summer, if I scatter my straw about, the weather instantly turns cold, snow and ice on the ground." "There is a place here for you in my ship," said the fool. "Come join us." And so the man with the straw joined them, and on they flew, on, and they presently came upon a man who was walking into the forest with a bundle of wood on his shoulder. The fool called down, "Good day, uncle. Tell us, why are you taking wood into the forest?" "Well, you see," said the man, "this is no ordinary wood. No, when I scatter this wood about, why, wherever it lands, up springs an army of soldiers." "Oh, there's a place for you in our ship," said the fool. "Come join us." And so the man joined them, and they all set, and they flew on, and they all began singing songs together, louder and louder as they flew. On and on, but they did not meet anyone else on the way. And presently they came flying up to the Tsar's palace. Down they sailed and cast anchor in the courtyard, singing loudly as they went. The Tsar was just beginning to eat his dinner, and he heard the loud singing, and he looked up just in time to see the ship come sailing down into his courtyard. Right away, he sent a servant out to see who this great prince was who had brought him a sailing ship, a flying ship. Well, the servant came up to the ship, and he saw that the fool was not a great prince, and his companions were not gentlemen. They were all just a bunch of dirty peasants. He went back and he told the Tsar, and the Tsar was not pleased at all at the thought of giving his only daughter, the princess, in marriage to a simple peasant. No, he had to think of some way to get out of this bargain. And so he told his servant, "Go to that fella. I am going to give them such tasks that they won't be able to perform them. They'll be happy to get away with their lives, and I will get the flying ship for nothing. So go to that fella and tell him he is to bring me a bottle of the magical water of life before I finish my dinner. The first of the fool's companion, the listener, had indeed been listening. He heard the words the Tsar had spoken to his servant, and these he told to the fool. And the fool didn't know what to do. If I had a week, if I had a month, if I had a year, a century, I still would not know where to find this magical water of life. But the fool had another companion, that man with his foot bound round his head, and he said, "You're not to worry about this. I'll take care of it." The servant came and gave the Tsar's command, and the fool said, "Very well, it shall be done." His friend unbound his foot round his head, wiggled it a little bit to get the stiffness out, ran off, and within a second he was off that ship, and, well, faster than my words could tell you, he was there at the magical water of life, and he gathered some up in a bottle. But then he gave a yawn. "I have lots of time. I think I'll just sit down and rest a bit." And so he sat down and soon was fast asleep. The royal dinner was coming to an end, and he still had not shown up with the water. The listener put his ear to the ground and listened for a moment. "He's fallen asleep. I can hear him snoring. And wait, I hear a fly buzzing above his head." Now, another of the companions spoke up, the man with the gun, and he said, "Now leave this to me." And he pointed his gun at the fly. And as that bullet whizzed over the swift-goer's head, he leaped up and in a second's time was back handing that bottle of magical water to the fool of the world. The fool gave it to the servant, and the servant took it to the Tsar. The Tsar had not yet left the table, and so his command had been performed exactly as he had ordered. The Tsar was not happy. "Bah, there's nothing for it but to give them another task." And he told his servant, go to them and tell him, that leader of the ship, that if he is such a clever fellow, then he probably has a good appetite, and he and his companions are to eat at a single sitting 40 roasted oxen and as much bread as can be baked in 40 ovens. The listener heard everything, and he told the fool what was coming. The fool was terrified. "It's all I can do. I can't even eat one loaf of bread at a sitting." But the fool had another friend, that very hungry man, and he said, "Oh, don't worry about it. It'll be nothing more but just a snack for me that I'll be happy to have before my dinner." And so the servant came and gave the command, and the fool said, "Very well, bring it on. We'll know what to do with it." And so they brought on 40 roasted oxen and as much bread as could be baked in 40 ovens. They set it on the table, and the fool of the world and his company had no sooner sat down when that hungry man had eaten it all. The Tsar then told his servant, go, now tell them that they are to drink 40 barrels of wine, each one holding 40 buckets full." Well, when the fool heard that, he thought, "I can't do that. I can't I can't even drink a bucket full of wine." But he had that friend, that very thirsty friend, who said, "Not to worry. You forget, I'm thirsty. It'll be no more than a sip for me." And so they brought the 40 buckets of wine, the 40 barrels of wine, each holding 40 bucketfuls, and that thirsty man tossed them down, 1 barrel of wine, 1 sip for that. The Tsar was not pleased when he heard that they had eaten all the food and drank all the wine. "What can I do for that fellow now?" Go and tell him that he is to prepare for his wedding. Take him to the bathhouse. Tell him to bathe, but make sure that that bathhouse is red hot. I want him to sizzle and frizzle, and that'll be the end of him. And so the bathhouse was made red hot. The fool was called, and he went along with his friend, that man with the straw. They were closed in, and the Tsar was certain that that was the end of them. But as soon as the door closed behind him, the man with the straw started scattering about, and instantly it turned so cold in there that the fool barely had time to wash before the water in the basin turned to ice. They spent the whole night shivering. And in the morning, when the doors were opened, there they were, alive and well and singing songs. The Tsar was red with rage. There is no getting rid of that fellow. Go and tell him that if he is to marry my daughter, he must be able to defend her. Tell him he has to have at least a regiment of soldiers. Now, that will be the end of that, because how on earth could a simple peasant, have enough money to raise a troop of soldiers? Ah. Well, the listener heard, and he told the fool what was coming, and the fool said, "This is it. It's over. My friends, my brothers, you have saved me more than once, but this time there's nothing to be done." And yet the fool had one more friend, and he spoke up, the man with the wood. "I suppose you've forgotten about me? Don't worry, I'll take care of everything." And so when the servant came and gave the Tsar's orders, the fool said, "Very well, but tell the Tsar that if he puts me off again, I will make war on his country." That night, while everyone slept, the man with the wood went about scattering that wood here and there, and everywhere it landed, up sprang a troop of soldiers, too many to be counted. And in the morning, when the Tsar looked out the palace windows, he saw that he was surrounded by troop upon troop of soldiers, all taking orders from the fool of the world. And now it was the Tsar's turn to be afraid. He called his servants, and as quickly as he could, he had them take gifts to the fool, jewels and fine clothes, and he invited him to the palace, and he begged him to marry the princess. The fool dressed himself in the fine clothes and stood there as handsome a young man as any princess could wish to marry. He presented himself before the Tsar. He fell in love with the princess, and she with him. They married the very same day, and the fool of the world became so clever that all the people in the court repeated every word he said. And that is the story of The Fool in the World and the Flying Ship, a story that I use in my work with Arts and Corrections. I go into the prisons and I help the inmates find, shape, and tell their stories. And one of the ways I do this is using Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey. And The Fool of the World and many other fairy tales wonderfully illustrate the 12 steps of that journey. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Linda. What a wonderful story. Fred, if you would like to join us as well, we can get to the question part. I would love to give everybody a little bit of an opportunity to formulate their questions, but I want to start off because I think we're all really interested in kind of knowing more of how do you experience, the art of storytelling and this way of sharing and connecting during the time of COVID.
Well, everyone has just been thrown into the internet to connect, and storytellers are all over the world now sharing stories. It's a time when stories can comfort, and we find inspiration. We find solutions in stories, and the Zoom, as we've done here, is a wonderful way of connecting. I know that a lot of my lessons now with the prison are going to have to go online for the prisons, because we can't go in for quite some time. And it's not, as Fred knows, it's a little bit disconcerting telling stories and not being able to see your audience and gather that energy from the audience. But it's still a time where you can disappear into your story and bring it to people, hopefully. I don't know, but I know that storytellers all over the world are now reaching out and touching and teaching with story.
Yeah, I think that's such a beautiful way of thinking about it, you know, that our community, for many years now, our community has become a global community, but now I think more than ever, we're connecting through these digital ports, and to be able to share these stories with communities that you wouldn't usually be in touch with is, I think, a really powerful and like you're saying, a healing moment.
Yeah.
What about you? How are you experiencing it?
I think there's several differences for me. Just the very act of telling the story to a dot on the screen, you know, that's the camera, is a very different experience. I also feel, however, that it worked. I mean, this is the first try at it for me, telling in a Zoom conference or any other digital format. And I thought it worked. I felt, like Linda was saying, I was still able to, one of the things that I'm doing when I tell a story is, and I'm trying to be in that story. I'm trying to make that story come alive through me. And I really felt like that was still able to happen. I don't know, it'd be interesting to hear how the audience perceived it compared to being in the same room physically, but it felt like it was working. And then the other part of my answer to that question is, it's amazing to see that, like I have friends and family on the East Coast. I'm on the West Coast, and when I do a storytelling, I don't invite my friends and family from the East Coast, but this time I did, and you know, because people can come from anywhere when it's this format. So it's a very interesting twist that wouldn't have happened probably except because of the COVID. And so it's like you said, Husha, it's a different way of bringing people together. And what I really love too is the fact that the art will go on. You know, it doesn't matter if we can't go outside our homes for COVID, the art will still happen, and we can't be held down, you know. So I really like that aspect. Yeah.
I definitely agree, and I loved what you said, because art is really about, you know, transporting your mind. And I can tell you from my perspective, even on this platform, I really felt transported. You know, I felt like I told like a personal story from you guys, and still knew that some other people were having the same experience as me. But at the same time, I really got to take myself there and just really just let my surroundings go altogether. Being alone in this room just really let me do that. So I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much. So we have a couple questions. Let me open them up for you. So we have a question from Anonymous. Many times people think of storytellers as people who read books to small children, but that's obviously not all that you do. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of the places that you tell stories?
Sure. There are various different kinds of venues where storytellers do their work. Excuse me. And you know, you can start with the obvious. Some storytellers go to libraries and they do tell stories to children. I want to make a distinction between what the Storytellers of San Diego and many other groups around the world are doing. We're trying to keep alive the ancient art of storytelling that doesn't involve reading a book to children or anyone else. It's the idea that we're reaching way back into ancient times before there was even writing, before there was even written word. And so we want to tell the stories that way. And that's something that's very particular, not just to the Storytellers of San Diego, but certainly particular to us and many other groups around. So yes, we do have that, I don't know if I should use the word stigma, but yes, people hear you're a storyteller, so they think of you as reading books to children. And so libraries, yes, it happens there. There are storytelling festivals that happen all over this country and other countries in the world where people come together for like whole weekends of time. And there are tents set up, and there may be 6 or 8 tents of 1,000 people where you can pick and choose where you want to go and who you want to listen to. What else? In San Diego, we put on storytelling concerts. We have our own festival that's a one-day festival that happens through the connection with our connection with Encinitas Library, which is near San Diego. What other places? We put on something every November called Telebration, and that happens just in a space that we can find to rent. And that's a worldwide event. So go ahead, Linda. Yeah.
Oh, I was going to say, yeah, that's a worldwide storytelling event. We know that storytellers all over the world are going to be sharing stories at that time. It's rather nice and connecting.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Actually, there's World Storytelling Day also, which happens in March, which is also a worldwide event. So 2 worldwide events happen in the year, March and November.
Yeah.
So tell us, how do people find out about these storytime events?
You can go to NSN, National Storytelling Network, and online, and in there you can find a map, and you can click on where you live or the area nearby where you live, and they keep a calendar of different storytelling events happening all over the country, and you can just click on your area and find storytelling events there. That's one way.
Okay, great. We have another question from Marie. Can a person join the Storytellers as a listener?
Yes.
Oh, yes, please. Yes, please.
Please do.
Yeah, there are groups all over. Again, Fred mentioned the National Storytelling Network. I think it's storynet.org is their address, and they will have a list of different organizations. I'm kind of halfway between San Diego and South Coast Storytellers Guild, which is, they meet monthly in Costa Mesa. So wherever you are, you can take a look around and see if there's a storytelling group there, and they pop up all kinds of wonderful places. San Diego storytellers have marvelous events going on. We tell stories in a Viking mead bar. They have a couple of storytellers who go into Rady Children's Hospital, and they are actually on staff to be there, not just for the children who are ill, but for parents, staff, anyone who needs a story that day. And it's not just storytellers, they bring in other forms of art too. It's a very special hospital, but again, they recognize the healing power of story for people in those places. And it's, oh my gosh, going on now, there's a lot of not just children, but adults who need stories for comfort.
Yeah, and then of course your own website, the Storytellers of San Diego.org.
Yes, I can tell you what Storytellers of San Diego are doing. But on there, our wonderful webmaster, Jim Dykman, he also puts events that other storytelling groups are doing on our website. So you can find a plethora of things.
Yeah, Jim actually just shared that in the chat as well, but I think it's not visible to everyone. Maybe Victor, you can share the website in the chat again. The next question, where can we hear more of your storytelling? I think this is another story, but maybe do you have some digital archives of some of the stories you've told?
Right now, because of the fact that COVID is happening, again, Jim Dykman, our web genius, we were supposed to do an all-day festival in March, and because of COVID, weren't able to do that. And so few people got the idea, and Jim carried it out, where he put up a YouTube page with, right now there's about 30 stories on there. It's called a virtual festival. So since the physical thing couldn't happen, anyone anywhere right now can go on YouTube, just put in Storytellers of San Diego. We have our own page, And there is a festival on there with about 30 stories, with probably, I think there might be 10 or 12 different tellers on there right now. So stories, you can also go to storytellersofsandiego.org, and there's a connection to that festival there too. So that's one place that you could hear stories digitally right now.
Well, thank you. The next question we have from Cameron. Linda, I'd love to know more about your work with the correctional facility. Where can I find out more about this? Ooh, terrible way. That's a better written question.
Yeah, you could try looking for Arts in Correction, AIC, and I love to Google. You know, you can just type in anything and all kinds of information pops up. It's some of the most powerful storytelling that I've done. I worked 19 years in the Fullerton School District for a program called All the Arts for All the Kids, and my lessons through storytelling rather than theater went across the curriculum and hit all of the standards, and I had a grand time doing it, but I was getting old and tired, you know, going into those classrooms, and when I was asked if I would be willing to go into the prisons and work with the men there, I said absolutely, and it's just been a really terrific thing when it opens back up and we can go back in. I know that there are a lot of grants going on right now, and there probably are more opportunities for artists to go in and work, not just storytellers, but people with dance and visual arts, music. So there are a lot of people in the arts going into the prisons, and I like to believe that we do make a difference with some of these men. You know, it's a matter of going in and helping them gain insight and responsibility for when they go back out into society.
Yeah, thank you so much for that work, Linda. I think it's really amazing.
Amazing.
Marie just wanted to say you're given a great gift tonight with the stories. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Marie.
We have another question from Anonymous. As I was listening to The Fool of the World, I was thinking about the crew of the almost tragic flight of Apollo 13. When they had a huge problem, like they gathered all their materials that they might use to address the problem. The story reminded me of the possibility of gathering all resources, materials, and friends.
Oh, I love that. I love that so much. And that's one of the reasons why I chose that particular story to illustrate the hero's journey, because a lot of the inmates don't want to form friendships. And it's a very powerful thing. We can do so, and look at what's happening now around the world. We can do so much more together than individually. And when they talk about isolating, that's perhaps the wrong word. We need to be careful about being too close to people, but still I think it's a time when we're actually becoming closer, if that makes sense. And I love what she said there about them. There they are in space and having to gather and work together.
I love the paradox that you just mentioned about in a time when we're supposed to stay further apart, we're growing closer together. I love it. Yeah.
We have another question from Dick Weaver. Can you talk about what it was like to look at the visual artwork and try to find what stories you wanted to share?
Well, Fred did a wonderful job of talking about how he was inspired by his. I remember finding the Ship of Fools, and it was the title that struck me, because, you know, Fool of the World and the Flying Ship, and here we have the Ship of Fools, and as I looked at more of their artwork, I saw that they had fools in many of their artwork, and I do like the fools. I was rather thrown by the bats at first, but I came to really appreciate and like those bats. They have very different art, and reading more about it, hearing more about it, I was able to look a little bit deeper than just just that first visual impact. So I picked that piece more by the title than by the content of it. But as I worked with it and dug deeper into it, came to see the correlation, and they have amazing art. That's what art is so wonderful about. It provokes.
Yeah, I can definitely, they're such amazing storytellers themselves, and
Yeah.
these elaborate stories that they're telling in just one image, I think it's inspirational for so many different directions that you can get inspired by. They themselves have a lot of inspirations, like the Ship of Fools, like Hieronymus Bosch's Ship of Fools that we learned about in on-air episode yesterday with the art history. So I think, yeah, you're right. There's so many stories that are being told, and that's the beauty about art, that we all have different associations. When we look at an image or when we hear a story, we have these personal connections with it.
And I like how you also said, Husha, that the story is in the picture too. So, you look at a picture and there's a story there, and it's a matter of just bringing that story out.
Definitely.
Through a completely different medium than like what we do is telling it.
Yeah. A different medium, but at the same time very similar, right?
It is.
Yes.
It is.
Yeah.
We paint with words.
Yes, we paint. I was just going to say we paint with words. Yes.
I love that. Yes, and I think nowadays, even in the visual arts, there is a lot of artists that also paint with words, and there's so much overlap that continues to become more apparent the more that artists are exploring interdisciplinary work, from storytelling to visual to performance to music and dance. And it's an exciting world to be part of.
It is. It is.
The next question is from Marie again. Do you write all your stories?
I work with mostly traditional material, fables, folk tales, fairy tales, but I have written personal stories also.
I'm pretty much have the same answer as Linda. I mostly work with stories that I collect. I would consider myself a collector of stories. Occasionally, I feel moved and strongly to tell a personal story. And that's me. I think it sounds like that's Linda. There are many storytellers out there, however, who probably tell more personal stories than any other kind, that they craft and that they write and that they tell. So it just really depends on the individual storyteller. But I mostly collect. Like Linda, I've told a handful of personal stories.
Thank you. We have just another comment from Ed White. Truly enjoyable to listen to your stories. Zoom is obviously different than watching the storytellers in person, but all the wonderful images show up in my mind while listening and pull me into the story. Thank you.
Oh, see, that's a lovely description of storytelling. It's like you audience, you are the co-creators of the story. Fred and I, we have the words and put them out there, and you are making those images in your head. You are the co-creators.
Yes, yeah. I second that.
Speaking of this digital platform, Sharon has a really interesting question. I like the full view of the storytellers. Body language adds to the story and keeps me engaged. How did you decide which method worked better? Did you ask friends? Also, have you thought about using virtual backgrounds with the storytelling?
I did think about a virtual background, but what I found is that movements became jerky, a little bit jerkier, and there was almost like a halo effect with a virtual background. So I stuck with my office here.
Which is also a wonderful background. So.
Yeah, my books.
I really love the books, yes. I didn't even think about virtual background. I just tried to find the place in the house that would work best in terms of lighting and background, that was behind me.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe a virtual background. Sounds like, Linda, you've tried it and maybe it doesn't work so well.
You know, I'll try it some more, but I did find that if you were using gestures, it would be kind of like blurry and jerky.
Yeah. We have another question. How did you start doing storytelling?
That one, Linda?
Yeah, well, for me, when my kids got old enough, they were both in school. I decided to go back to college because when I was young, I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I just, you know, I didn't do it. But I was ready to go back, but I still wasn't sure what I wanted to do. Um, I I became an American Studies major, which it was perfect. It was interdisciplinary. It had everything I loved, history, literature. It had everything. And yet I still didn't know what I was going to do with this great major. And then I heard that there was going to be a storyteller at the San Juan Capistrano Mission, which is very close to where I live, Jim Cogan. And I grabbed one of my kids and we went there. And oh my gosh, he made me laugh. He told coyote stories, but then he told a story from American history. It was perfect. It was about a stagecoach driver, some renowned Charlie Parkhurst. And at the end of the story, it turned out that Charlie was a woman. And the story just floored me. And I thought instantly, that's what I want to do. I want to bring the story and history, his story, alive. And at that time, South Coast Storytellers Guild was doing a 6-week introduction to storytelling at our local community college. And I jumped in there, and I was really very shy person. And the first time I had to stand up and tell a story, my knees were shaking, so I had a long skirt on and the skirt was going like this, but I did it. And the second time, my knees weren't shaking, but my hands were shaking and I didn't know what to do with them, but I told the story. And then we had to pick a story and work it so it became our story and tell it on the last day of class when friends and family and school were invited in. And I picked a folk tale that my sister and I had loved. I still have the Ratty Tatty folktale book with its wonderful pictures. And my kids loved it. I told the stories to them. So I picked a story from there, and something marvelous happened. It was like an epiphany. As I started sharing that story that I love so, and I was so happy to be sharing with the audience, all nervousness disappeared. It was just the story coming out. And it's been that way ever since. It truly was an epiphany. It was like, this, I know with a certainty, is what I am supposed to be doing. It became much bigger than just finding the history and story. It's everything. But that's my story.
I grew up in a family environment where people were telling stories all the time. So from the time I was a little kid, there were the family stories that were being told. And I would say that my mother especially, probably my brother. My brother was a comic, is still. And I think when you're being funny, you're telling funny stories is what you're doing. So, and I was always hearing the old family tales from my mother, especially, and I just sort of was doing that in an informal way. I would tell stories, and I would take adventures, and I would be sharing something about those adventures with people. But one thing that really clicked in one time, I was walking along a river with a friend, telling of some experience I had just had, and she said to me, "Guy, I love when you tell a story. I feel like I'm there." And that just kind of registered in my head. Didn't think much more about it after that until years later when I serendipitously stumbled upon the Storytellers of San Diego. I had never known there was such a thing as doing storytelling for audiences. It was just something that always happened sitting around the campfire or sitting around the dinner table with the family. And so I started looking into it and found that there was a course that you could take on storytelling. Vicki Reed had it here at the University of San Diego for years. I took that course a couple of times just to kind of start to get the idea what it would feel like to get up in front on a stage and get up in front of people and tell stories. So that was probably about 1995, and I've been practicing at it ever since.
That's amazing. I could definitely use some of your practice in telling stories and talking to the public. Hopefully one day I'll get there too. I want to ask one more question, but I do want to let everybody know that if they have more questions for the storytellers, if they're interested in finding out more about where they tell stories or how to get a storyteller to be part of an event that they're doing or something that they're hosting, reach out to the storytellers, go to their website, which is in the chat, and talk to them. And yeah, I'm sure they're open to having those conversations. So the last question I want to ask you, stories have a form and flow. We are in the middle of a story with this crisis. Do you have any insight from a storyteller's perspective on where we are in the arc of the hero's journey?
Oh, good question. We are on a journey, aren't we? Yeah, test, allies, the ordeal. We're in the middle of the ordeal, and as we come out of this, the next stage of the journey is called the reward. And they say, you know, encountering death, and it's a metaphorical death, but I mean, this is a very real death for many people, and it's a big reward getting through this, and we're going to survive this ordeal. And that's when you have the road back, and we gather up what we have learned, what we've gained, what we've been granted as we went through this. And the stage after that is called the resurrection. We have to change one more time. We've been changing through this whole crisis, haven't we? And we have to create a new self for this new world that we're going to be going into. Things are going to be opening up again, but it's going to be different. I don't know if we're ever going to, you know, they talk about, are we going to go back to the normal? And no, we're not. It's going to be all new. I think that the new normal, just as in the stages of the journey, should reflect the best parts of our old selves and the lessons learned along the way. And you come out of that journey, it's called the return with the elixir. What do you bring back from this, what they call the special world that we've been through? You know, what have we learned? It's our final test. And we're going to be serving as an example for others. But they say, you know, it shows above all that death can be overcome. All of those metaphorical and real deaths. So the hero's journey, I'd say we're still somewhere right there in the ordeal, but we are going to be walking through it. You know, that's a definite thing. You don't stay there, you keep walking.
I think that's
Otherwise you're doomed to repeat it if you don't follow through all those stages and learn and come out and share what you've learned. You're gonna keep repeating.
Yeah. Well, let's hope we definitely learn something as a society. And
yeah,
you know, thank you so much. I think that's a wonderful note to end on, unless you have something to add, Fred.
Well, I think since you think that's a wonderful note to end on, we'll go ahead and do that. Yes,
Okay.
I certainly could go on, but I'll go with your cue on that. Yeah.
Okay.
this was so nice connecting with everyone.
Thank you. Yes, thank you so much, Linda and Fred, for the wonderful storytelling and for really giving us all a little bit of healing on this Friday night.
And Hooja, thank you so much for hosting this and being so open to this whole process. So thank you too.
Of course.
Yes, rather than
all
just
the audience members who are here.
Yeah. Rather than just canceling, having this wonderful online adventure.
Yeah.
Adventure for sure.
Yeah.
My own little hero's journey with this online.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much. And everybody have a wonderful evening, and hopefully we'll see you soon.
Good night.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.